Thank you for joining us today in our first of the series of our Chimera life-saving processing webinars. My name is Evan Martzel. I am the Sales and Business Development Manager for QPS here in the Americas. Joining me today will be Marcus Kwasek. He is our Technical Sales Lead. He will be doing the demonstration today. Of course, if you guys have any questions or concerns during the presentation, please enter them into the chat. At the end of the presentation, we will take some time to answer your questions. Also, please, if you're interested in a trial license, a free trial license of what we're demoing here today, please enter demo in the chat and we have your contact information and we will get back to you. Okay, well, I think I'll hand it over to Marcus now, who is going to do the presentation. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and hop right into this demonstration here, but before I do so, again, this is our life-saving webinar series. We have one starting obviously today, and we'll have another one coming up in February. I would like to thank Alpine Ocean Seismic Survey for actually providing us with the data set that I will be using for our demonstration for this entire series. They provided it to us back in 2019 in response to our TU Delft Sound Speed Inversion Challenge. If you like what you see, it's thanks to Alpine Ocean. I'm going to go ahead and start our webinar now. Enjoy. I'd like to start off by going over something that we probably have all seen at some point during our survey work. Now I have some lines loaded here that I've put into a group called Survey 1. I also created a dynamic surface for these lines, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And we can clearly see that we have some sort of vertical issue going on. Now, I can take a look at this a little bit better by using our rectangular select on the right toolbar. Drawing that rectangle, I'm just going to pivot it so it's going to be perpendicular to our survey area. And I'm going to launch the slice tool. Now, the slice editor can be launched by either going to the taskbar at the top or by pressing the hotkey number 2. Once this is loaded, we can clearly see that this orange and yellow line are clearly not the same as everything else. There's some sort of offset here. And we can see which lines these are by going to our Project Sources tab. We can see that it's line 004 and 008. Now in the past, you could always fix this by applying a static offset to a particular line. And to do this, we can just go and highlight a particular line, open up our processing settings, and then go to the vertical referencing tab, and then apply a static offset. And this will shift the entire line that static offset. Now, we may not necessarily want to do that because it can take a long time, especially if you have multiple lines with different offsets. So, what we can do is we can again have a drawn rectangle and just move it to wherever you'd like. I'm going to go to the Tools dropdown and go to Dynamic Surface Shifts and go Line Height Matching Tool. Now again, this is going to load that same slice that we were looking at before. And then you'll notice that we now have a line height matching control. So from this control, I can highlight a particular offset and plug in a manual value. So let's just say I want to plug in a 25 centimeter offset. You can automatically see what's going to happen with that survey line. I can also just use the little arrows and move this line up and down however I'd like, just to see what it's going to do. But you may not want to spend the time trying to manually figure out what each line's offset should be. So what we can do is we can lock one of these lines as a reference. So let's say I want this blue line to be my reference line. I'm going to go ahead and click this little lock checkbox, and then I want to run the auto compute. Now what this is going to do is Qimera is going to do a least square analysis of the surveyed area and determine what offset should it apply to each line in order to have the smallest standard deviation. So once I click that, you'll see that it does it pretty quickly, because again, it's only doing this, it's looking at this particular rectangle that we have selected. So you may get a different result if you were to move this rectangle from one area to the other. Just something to keep in mind. But we can see that it applies in these different offsets to each of these lines. Again, it has a 0 offset for that blue line because I had locked it beforehand. Once you've run the tool, you'll also notice that it locked all these other lines. If you want to make a small adjustment afterwards, so let's say I wanted to shift the red line up a little bit or down a little bit, I could uncheck that box and I could come in here and manually move that again, either by using the up and down arrows or by manually plugging in a value. Once you're happy with this, you can always just save and exit, or you can export your offsets from the dock options drop down. So if you click that, you'll see that it creates a little ASCII screenshot here. You can copy this to a clipboard and paste it somewhere else, or you can save this as a text file in order for your use later on. But let's say I'm happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and click this save icon here. Our guided workflow will automatically recognize that something has changed and say you probably want to recompute or reprocess some of these lines. So I can either click yes, or I can take a look and you can see that I've got these 4 lines where I've applied a vertical offset that they need to be reprocessed. So I could either just click the auto process button, or I can just use the yes for guided workflow. Qimera will now go ahead and reprocess those lines, as you can see in the job activity tool. It will then go ahead and update any surface that those lines are associated with, assuming that they are in fact a dynamic surface, of course. Now, once this is done, we can clearly see that this makes our surface look much, much better. So again, I can move this rectangle around, I can open up that slice editor again, and we can see that the data looks much, much better. Now, if you want to go ahead and take a look at these offsets after the fact, we can always highlight our lines, go to the processing settings. You'll now notice that as of Qimera 2.3, we have a shifts tab here. If we go to this shifts tab, you'll notice that this little pop-up is just saying that some of these lines have different settings. This is just a warning for you. Go ahead and click OK. And you can see that this little orange part here is highlighted to show where the settings are different. We do have one of these lines that does not have any offsets, so this tick box is unchecked for that particular line. But we can always review the shifts that are being done. So I can go ahead and click this Review Shifts button, and you'll see that you can see that there's 4 lines that have a vertical offset using the line height matching shift option. Okay. So if you wanted to again export this as a text file, copy clipboard, or save it as a text file, it's up. You can also do it from here as well. Once you're happy with it, you can always close it. If you want this orange box to go away, you can just click this green icon. This won't actually change anything with that other line because it's just a 0 offset, so it won't hurt your lines at all. So I can go ahead and click OK. And this is just recognizing that I've changed something in my processing settings, so it's telling me I can recompute. You can always clear this manually, or you can just let it reprocess if you'd like to do that as well. The next portion that I would like to go over is the ability to shift an entire surface by comparing it to another. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and disable my Survey 1 and turn off its surface as well. And I'm going to go to Survey 2. I've got these survey lines here, which are in fact different from Survey 1. I've also created a dynamic surface of these lines, and the data itself looks pretty good. Again, I've already pre-cleaned all this, so everything looks as it should. But if I were to compare this to, say, to survey number 1, you can actually see that there seems to be some type of difference. We can get a better idea of this by going to our profile tool. So I'm going to click on the profile tool here on the right side of the toolbar. And I'm going to go ahead and quickly draw a profile. Now, looking at this, we can either hover over here and we can see the 2 red dots representing the different survey lines, or different surfaces, excuse me. Or we can use purple line as a reference and make this a little easier to see. So you can see we have a yellow line and a purple line representing the 2 different surfaces. Once we've taken a look at this, we can also highlight both and click the delta button. And this will create a different line within the profile display showing what is the delta between those 2 dynamic surfaces along that profile, of course. So we could either go and decide, okay, we know that survey 1 is in fact correct. Maybe we want to shift survey 2. So from here we know that maybe I have apply an offset of roughly 25 centimeters by just taking a look at this way. Or we can use our new tool for this. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to the Tools drop-down. Notice I've got my survey lines selected and I've got my dynamic surface selected. I go to Dynamic Surface Shift and I go Static Vertical Shift Tool. From here, we have to identify which surface do we want to shift. So I'm going to say I want to shift survey 2 25 centimeter. Now what surface do I want to compare it to? So if I do survey 1, this is my reference one. Where do I want to apply this? How do I want to do the analysis for this? So this first area is going to area of computation represents where is it taking a look at. So I can have it everywhere, or I can actually draw a selection area and have it only look at a certain spot. And if I did have a certain selection area, I could also have it be an exclusion mask, maybe just have it ignore a certain area. But once you're happy with these first 3 settings, I'm going to go ahead and click Calculate Optimal Shift. Now again, it's doing the same least squares analysis, determining what offset does it need to apply to your shift surface in order to have the smallest standard deviation. And you can see it gives you a nice little summary here. Again, we can export these results either as a text file, or I can do a screen capture, which will just take a screenshot of this for you and save it into your export folder. Now again, it's done this analysis, it's determined that it's calculated a nice area, and it says that it needs to apply roughly a 0.244 meter offset to survey 2 in order to get to have the closest match to survey 1. So if you're happy with that, you can go ahead and click Save Shift. And again, this will give you a list of the lines that are being changed. Go ahead and click Continue. And again, we can see that we have these lines ready to be reprocessed. We'll go ahead and use that same guided workflow ribbon and click Yes. Now again, Qimera is going to go through, reprocess each of the lines. As we can see, our Job Activity tab, what it's doing as it happens. And once this is all complete, Qimera will then, of course, update the associated surface that those lines are applied to. Once this is complete, we can again draw a profile over these 2 survey surfaces, and we can see that they will look much better. But before I even do that, you can still see just by going between these 2 lines, it looks much, much better. Quick and easy way to flash between 2 different surfaces, by the way, is by highlighting both of them. And you'll note if you press the tilde key, which is right above the tab key on your keyboard or right next to the number 1, this will automatically only turn on one surface, and you can flash between the 2. Nice little tips and tricks for you there. Now, again, I want to compare these 2 using a profile. So again, I'm just going to open up a profile again. Just draw it across. And right from the get-go, we can see that these look much similar. It's harder to tell where these lines are. So again, if to make my life a little easier, I'm going to highlight both of them and click this delta button. And you can see that once I have delta highlighted, that the difference is on the level of centimeter or less. It looks like over top of this hill here, we have some larger deviations, which is normal considering there are many different survey lines going over different objects. But either way, this is much better than what it was before. And that is how you apply a shift to an entire surface. Now, just like with the line matching tool, you do have the ability to take a look at what offsets were being applied after the fact. So if I highlight those lines again and then go to my processing settings, I can go to my shifts tab and then review shifts. You can now see that in the static vertical shift column, there's a 0.244 meter offset. And just like before, we can always click the export button, take a look at this in an ASCII format, copy it to a clipboard, or save it as a text file for later use. Now, I would also like to point out that this type of shift, the static surface shift, is only going to be useful when you only have a single value applied, because it's going to apply that same value to every single line. Now, you may come across a situation perhaps where you have gone from RTK GPS to GGPS, and you have this variable shift or drifting occurring, especially in the height. Now, you're probably not going to want to use this tool there, but we do have a varying vertical shift tool, which I'm going to show you that now. In order to demonstrate this, I went ahead and loaded in this 0015 center line here. Checking the checkbox here, I can make this survey track line visible, and I can turn on its associated dynamic service by clicking this checkbox here. Now I'm just going to turn off survey 1 real quick just so we can have two surfaces to look at. And here you can see that this bad height dynamic surface starts above the other surface and then goes below it and disappears altogether. We can get a better idea of what's going on here by using our profile tool. So I can click the profile tool and quickly draw a profile. And we can see that this bad height line again, it's clearly going above and below the other surface. So we have a problem. We can also look at this in 3D mode by using the explore tool. And I can come in here and rotate this around, zoom in, zoom out, whatever I want to do. And you can see that that surface starts above and goes below the other surface as well. But what can we do to fix this? So one thing you can do is use our time series editor doc. So highlight your bad line, go to the time series editor doc, and I'm going to switch this to the height because this is what we're interested in. Now here you can see that I've got two navigation sources, the primary being the blue line that is highlighted here, and I've got a secondary source in the background, which actually is the original RTK of the survey. This bad navigation is clearly what's causing our issue because you can see this nice vertical drift that goes up and then down along the surface. Well, you may not have two different sources available. Here, I could go to my processing settings and I could go to my vertical referencing tab and I could just turn off that bad navigation source and have it so it uses the original source. But you may not have that option. Maybe you only have one navigation source. So what can you do? We can use time series editor to use the tools in here to interpolate across those points. So I can draw a rectangle using this yellow box here. And this will actually go ahead and interpolate from beginning and end of that rectangle I just drew. Now, we could also be a little bit more specific about what we want done by inserting samples along an interpolated line. So anywhere where I've got a point that I have interpolated, I can actually insert a sample and make edits here. So here I could create my own custom surface, or profile rather, along that source. So that's one way you could do it. I'm just going to undo that real quick. Another thing you could do is you could use our sample range tool. So here I can just draw a box wherever I've got samples, and this I can shift an entire section at once. So this is another great tool to use maybe when you've gone from just RTK to DGPS in one quick little stint, and you just need to adjust that one little area. So that can be quite useful. But as you can imagine, making these changes and saving it and reprocessing may work in some situations, but when you've got this very dramatic and extended drift going on, it's probably not going to work the best. You're probably going to still see some sort of artifacts in your data. So what can you do? We can actually use our varying height shift tool. So in order to do this, I'm just going to make sure I have one surface highlighted up here. Go to Tools, Dynamic Surface Shifts, Varying Vertical Shift tool. Now this opens up this window. Now you'll see that the dynamic surface to shift that is automatically chosen is whatever the one I had highlighted. So you can always choose whichever one you want to make a shift to. But we need a reference surface. So I'm going to use survey 1 as my reference surface because that's what we used the first time we did our previous tool. So just like in our 2 as well, we do have the option to have a shape in here that we could use an exclusion mask, so it will ignore that area. It's just another way of doing this calculation for you. Now, this sample every portion of this window is pretty important. We need to tell Qimera how often do we want to sample in time in order to determine how many offsets should be applied to this data. So 1 second being the minimum. You can always increase this however you want. So as you increase it, you can see I have it at 7 seconds right now, which accounts to roughly 16.3 meters based on the speed of the vessel for the survey line. Now, in this type of data, I'm probably going to want this to be pretty small just because it's a pretty dramatic change. It's pretty evident something's happening very frequently. So I want to keep that sample every very tight to try and account for that. I'm going to go over this smoothing window option here in just a moment, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and click Calculate Shift. So once I've calculated this shift, we can see that it creates a profile, and this is the offset that it would be applying to the data. And just comparing this vertical shift profile to what we had in our original time series editor, you can see that the profile is more or less opposite, which is what we would expect. This is the offset that we need to apply to our survey line in order to correct for the problem down here. Now, going up back to the smoothing window option, this is how often do we want to apply a smoothing filter. So is it going to smooth this line between one sample, which is what it's doing here automatically, which is every 2.3 meters. I can increase that value and we can instantly see what it's going to do to our profile here. So here, if I increase this, you can see how it changes the profile that it's going to be applying for an offset. But obviously in this situation, we probably don't want that. We actually want this to probably be pretty tight, down to about 1 second, so we can account for all these changes. Now, with this profile, just like with the time series editor, we have the ability to make edits as well. We can use the interpolation tool and interpolate between points. We can undo any changes that we're doing. There's many different options. You can also see that there's a doc options here, and here's where you can export this profile to an ASCII string for a reference later on, or you can save a screenshot using the save to image option, which will take an image of this for you and put it into your export folder. Once you're happy with this, we can go ahead and just click Save Shift, right? Now, just like with our other tools, Qimera is going to have a pop-up telling you you're applying changes to this line. I'll go ahead and click Continue, and you can see that this line's ready to be processed. I'm going to go ahead and use that guided workflow ribbon again and click Yes. And Qimera will reprocess that line and update the surface. And we can see that it makes that match much nicer now. Just like with our other tools, we have the option to take a look at any offsets we've applied using any of these tools. So again, I can go and use the processing settings by highlighting my line, click Processing Settings. I'm going to go to the Review Shifts within the Shifts tab, and here you can see it's showing any offsets I've used depending on what tool I use. So with the varying vertical shift, we can't really show you a full profile. So what we do is we tell you the average, minimum, and maximum values that we are applying to that line. And again, we can use that export option again to show the ASCII, copy to clipboard, and or save it as a text file for later use. Okay. You can also take a look at what was applied to lines using the varying vertical shift tool by using the time series editor. And this is because it is a time series offset that we're applying. So within the time series editor, you can now see within the options, we now have a vertical shift. So here you can see what was applied along each individual survey line. The last part of the dynamic surface shift tool I want to show you is our static horizontal shift. In order to demonstrate this, I went ahead and loaded in some survey lines that I put into a group called Survey 3. I'm going to go ahead and turn those on within my project sources doc, and also going to turn off any of the other track lines. I'm also going to turn on Survey 3, which is our dynamic surface that I've created for those lines, and turn off my bad height Survey 2, and then turn on Survey 1, which was our original reference surface. So if I highlight Survey 1 and Survey 3, you can see that if I flash between the two using that tilde key, there is in fact a horizontal shift. To better demonstrate this, you can also create some contours. By doing that, it gives you a better idea of what's actually going on. So you can highlight any surface you want to, go to Layer, and Contouring. Once you run through our contouring tool, you'll have these new SD objects that will be found in your Project Layers doc. I went ahead and did create these beforehand, so I'm going to turn on Survey 1 and Survey 3 contours, and you can see how these contour lines are in fact shifted. If I highlight again those two, use that tilde key, I can flash between the two contours. Now, how can we fix this and what would actually cause this? In this particular case, I actually imported some navigation into my Survey 3 lines that were in the wrong ellipsoid. So this survey was actually collected in 93-2011 ellipsoid. I imported some navigation into Survey 3 lines that was in ITRF 2014, and that is in fact the horizontal shift that we are seeing here. One thing you could do to fix this problem would be to import new navigation files with the proper ellipsoidal reference, or you could use our static horizontal shift tool. In order to use this tool, I'm going to go ahead and highlight Survey 3, which is the surface I want to shift. I'm going to go to Tools, Dynamic Surface Shifts, and Static Horizontal Shift tool. When this opens, you can see it sets Survey 3 as my surface to shift. I can also set aligned objects such as the contours that we created to use as well in this view. I'm going to go ahead and choose those Survey 3 contours, and then I'm going to choose my reference surface as Survey 1 and the Survey 1 contours as well. Now you can see if I zoom in on either of these windows, it does the same to the other. So here we want to identify how do we apply a shift. So I'm going to zoom in on a particular object, and I'm going to use my pick tool, which is right here at the top. So I'm going to go to pick mode. I'm going to click at the center of this particular object. I'm going to do the same to this one over here, and you can see that it shows the shift that is going to be applied. It gives me a nice summary down below of all the different properties. Now, if you wanted to move this after the fact, I can always click and drag to move this around just to however, if I want to make any small adjustments really. You can also do multiple points. So I can zoom out and pick another spot. So for example, maybe I want to pick on this spot over here. I'm going to go to explore mode, just drag over there, zoom in to that particular spot. Maybe I want to go ahead and use that pick mode on that object. And I can get another summary. And you'll see that we're getting an average difference with these 2 points. And that is the offset that would be applied to your data. Now, you can use this pick mode option. You also notice that there's a contour matching tab at the top here. From here, it's just going to show the contours that we have loaded as the line objects. Now, as I can explore around, pick a particular spot I want to focus on. Maybe I want to look at that one object that we picked in the first place. I can now go to our shift mode, and now I'm going to be able to click and drag those contours around to where I want them to be. So maybe I want to make sure that this is sitting around top of that. I can also, again, explore around to different areas and take a look at other objects, see how I want things to look. Again, maybe I want to move it around a little bit. You can always move this however you want until you're happy with it, and then you just click save, and it'll apply a new line for you. So you have 2 different ways of applying a shift, and again, you get a total summary of each shift here. Either way, you get an average difference after the fact, and that is the shift that will be applied. If you want to look at this a little bit differently, we have also the ability to change the azimuth and the elevation lighting settings. So if I zoom in over here, for example, you can see on this particular spot here, I can move this around and it'll change the sun azimuth. I can also move the light up above and down to increase the shadow effects. This is just to help make things a little easier for you. Now, once you're happy with this, if you want to go ahead and export anything, you can go to the export drop down below. You can export this table as a text file. You can export the surface views as an image, or you can export this entire window as an image, and it'll go to your export folder of your project. Okay. You also notice that there's a dock options to remove all point pairs if you want to restart for some reason. But let's say you're happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and click Save Shift. Once that happens, you'll see Qimera will give that same list again to show which lines are going to be changed. I'm going to click Continue. And that guided workflow tells me I have lines that need to be reprocessed. I'm going to click Yes. And we can see these lines shifting as they're being processed. Once the dynamic surface is done updating, we'll be able to go ahead and do a quick comparison of the two. And I'm going to turn off the contours, highlight survey 1 and 3, and you can see how these match much nicer now. Just like with our other tools, if you want to see what has been done to a particular line with the shifting tools, you can highlight the lines in question, go to Processing Settings, go to the Shifts tab, and then click Review Shifts again. Here you can see with the horizontal shifts, you can have a static easting and a static northing listed. Just like before as well, you can always click Export, copy to clipboard, and paste it somewhere else, or save it as a text file for later use. If at any given time you would like to turn off or on one of these shifting tools, you can always do so by highlighting the line in question, going to the Processing Settings, going to the Shifts tab, and then you could enable or disable the associated tick for each of the tools. If it is turned on, it will apply the shift. If it's turned off, it will not apply the shift. One thing that is also worth noting is that the order in which these are applied is the order that they were ran. So if you chose to run a static vertical shift, it's going to apply that shift, and then afterwards you ran the varying vertical shift tool, it will then apply the varying vertical shift. So keep that in mind. If this is dependent on the other one, it could cause some issues with your data. And we do also demonstrate this by, if you were to unclick this checkbox, we do have this little pop-up that warns you saying that results may be dependent on others. Okay? You can also clear any of the shifts that you've applied to any lines by going to the Tools drop-down in Dynamic Surface Shifts, and you can either choose Adjust Vertical Shifts or Adjust Horizontal Shifts. So to go into the Vertical Shift window, you'll see that it gives you the option to choose a particular surface or particular lines that you may have highlighted, and then you can choose to clear all shifts or clear a particular part of one tool, adjust a static vertical shift by a certain amount, or replace the static vertical shift by a constant. If we go to the horizontal window, I'm just, again, Tools, Dynamic Surface Shifts, Adjust Horizontal Shift, it's the same thing. We can choose either to apply it to selected sonar files or a particular survey surface. So if I choose Survey 3, which is the last surface that we were messing with, I can choose to clear the static horizontal shift, adjust that static horizontal shift by a certain amount, or replace that static horizontal shift. I'm going to go ahead and just show you this by using the clear static horizontal shift. Click OK. It'll give me that same pop-up window letting me know I'm making changes to these lines. Click OK. And I'll choose to reprocess using the guided workflow. And we'll see that those lines are now being shifted back, and then it will update my surface. Okay. I hope that was enlightening for everybody. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera back on now. Evan's going to go through any questions that were posted. Evan, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Marcus, and very well done on the presentation. I'd definitely like to give credit to our Qimera development team for continually developing some very unique and very useful tools, and that's what we're going to be highlighting in this webinar series moving forward. So this is just the first iteration of the series, but we're going to have 2 more following this, what Marcus will mention briefly at the end of the presentation. But we do have a few questions here, Marcus. So the first one says, what types of surveys do you see this functionality being used on?
Right. Well, these tools rather are going to be most useful in particular surveys where you may be perhaps near shore, or areas where you're in very high traffic areas or high port areas, or anywhere really where there's potential for a loss of GPS. You also can have a lot of issues or see these tools used in certain situations where maybe you're doing a survey of the same spot over and over again. So for AUV or ASV surveys, doing a survey of a particular port, for example, you can quickly match the surveys that are being repeated, and especially if they have different sonar setups, maybe there's an offset issue, or maybe you're not sure what a previous survey was collected in, if it was a certain ellipsoidal height and or a certain orthometric height, maybe they applied a shift to their data in general. So you can quickly snap everything to the original pre-survey or post-survey that was done for a particular project. So those are the main things that I would probably focus on with this tool.
Yeah, I agree. I would also mention maybe even some deep water AUV stuff where positioning and height issues are always a problem. And if you're doing continuous surveys in those areas, a tool like this would very quickly and easily allow you to snap that data together. So great, thank you. I got another question here that says, what types of raw data file formats can this functionality be used on?
Okay. Well, these tools can only be used on strictly just raw data, which is actually said in the question. So if you were to bring in like process point files, so maybe QPDs or anything, you could also bring in perhaps some GSFs, can either be a raw or a process point file, or just XYZ data. You won't be able to use this tool because it actually needs to be able to communicate with the original raw information. And just to give an example, some of the raw file formats that we have, let me pull it up real quick, the full list. So we have our Quincy DB files, we have our Kongsberg's .alls and KML files, Reson's S7K files. There's also the HiPAC HSX, EdgeTech JSFs, and for example, the Navo GSF files. Those are just some examples of the raw file formats that we accept. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I have another question here is asking, is this functionality included in a standard Qimera license?
Good question. The short answer is no. If you were to be renting a license, this would become available automatically. But if you have a purchase license, and that includes both perpetual and our subscription formats, this would only be available if you were to purchase the add-on, which is an additional charge on top of the original price.
Okay, great. And then another question, again, I mentioned this in the beginning, but we have a question here that says, how can we get a trial license of this? So please, again, if you're interested in a trial of this, comment demo in either the questions or the chat, and we will follow up with you directly and provide you with a free license. We're also happy to do some one-on-one trials and demonstrations with your own data. So we'd be happy to help with that too. So please, if you are interested, comment demo either in the questions or the chat. Okay, great. Well, we do have a couple more questions here in the questions, but I think that we're kind of running out of time here. So if you have further questions, please type them in the question box. We will get back to everyone who has a comment here. We're also going to leave this question box up for a little longer, even after we sign off. So if there's something you guys are thinking about or don't have time to type quite yet, by all means, please add that here and we will get back to you. So Marcus, I guess I'll hand it off to you one more time. Maybe we can briefly touch on what other webinars we have coming up in the future. Please.
Yeah, for sure. I do see a couple other small questions. We have a little bit more time for those as well. One person asked, how do you pick which line you need to lock in the line height matching tool? I see that one. You can do that. There's just a checkbox within the line height matching tool control box. Once you click that checkbox, it will lock it for you. Next question I see here is, how much overlap between the lines do you need for the dynamic vertical shift option? Wherever there is overlap, it will do the least squares analysis. So you do need to have some form of, if there is no overlap, it's not going to look at that spot and apply a shift. I think those were all the major ones.
One just came in saying, will this recording of the demo be available after the fact? Yes, it will. So we are recording this and we will make it available via our website. Also, it's a good idea that if you follow us on social media, which is what we have on the splash screen now, if you were to put your phone camera up to that, it will open our social media channels. So LinkedIn and Facebook and other channels here are probably the best place to get the most up-to-date info. So we do post when these recordings are available. However, they will be made available through our website.
Okay. Ooh, here's a good question, actually. Where's a gentleman from Brazil asking how will this affect backscatter products? It won't, actually, because backscatter is only going to be looking at the time series intensity values coming back. So you will not be affecting your backscatter data by using this tool. And I think that is it. Those are the ones that they're big standouts. Again, any other questions I have not covered, we will reach out to you guys directly. I do also want to give another thank you to Alpine Ocean for providing us with this data and allowing us to use it during this webinar. We really appreciate it. And just to talk about so we have some other webinars coming up here in February. The next one in this series, which will be going over our sound speed inversions tool, our TU-Delft sound speed inversion tool, and any refraction issues. That's at the end of February. We do also have a joint webinar with Chesapeake going over functionalities between QPS products and SonarWiz. So stay tuned on our social media and our website for dates and times of that webinar as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys again for attending. We look forward to seeing you guys at another QPS webinar soon. And just as I mentioned before, we will leave the webinar open for another, say, 5 or 10 minutes in case you have some more questions you want to type in here, or if anyone else, again, if you want a demonstration or a trial of this product, please comment in the questions or chat, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, thank you guys again.